Hey everyone, Sophia and Lauren here again for episode 6. I'm super excited.
Hello.
Oh, that was a little less exciting of a hello than mine was, Lauren.
Hi everybody. I hope you are having a fantastic week so far.
Yeah, me too. I don't know. I can't put a lid on the excitement I have for this because it's basically everything that I've been doing for the last 3 years in therapy. We're going to do like a mini summary on it in this episode, so I'm stoked. Do people even use that word anymore?
Stoked.
Is it just me?
Yeah,
stoked.
We could use that word. Yes.
Okay, so what are we talking about? The goal of this episode is to kind of give a basic rundown through what anxiety is, how we deal with anxiety, what our anxiety looks like, see if it compares to any of y'all out there, like what your anxiety looks like. And we're specifically speaking to people who don't really know what to do with their anxiety, who are feeling super hopeless when it comes on.
Hence our title, Hopelessly Anxious.
Yeah. They're just like, this happens to us too still, where we get that feeling of it coming over us and then we don't know what to do. So we're really going to dig down into the basics of anxiety and those really first coping mechanisms that we started working with and what helps us when we get into that mindset of a hopeless, anxious state. So,
yep.
What's anxiety, Lauren?
So textbook definition of anxiety. It was a little bit difficult to find, but the culmination of everything I found was it is a mental health disorder characterized by feelings of worry, anxiety, or fear that are strong enough to interfere with one's daily activities / life. Examples of anxiety disorders include panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Symptoms include stress that's out of proportion to the impact of the event or inability to set aside a worry, and of course, restlessness. Anxiety disorders are real. They're serious medical conditions, just like any other serious medical conditions. Oh my gosh, I can't talk. They are just as real and serious as a physical disorder, such as heart disease or diabetes. And anxiety disorders are most common and pervasive mental disorders in the United States, which honestly didn't surprise me. But I think that they do go a little bit underdiagnosed. So
yeah, and I wanted to touch on that too, because even if you don't have diagnosed anxiety, this episode is for you still, because anxiety doesn't have to be diagnosed to make an impact on your daily life, because that's one of the things that you just read off in that definition is a fear, stress, feelings of worry, feelings of nervousness that impact you in a negative way during your daily life. So whether it's like constantly or just sporadically, either way, your life's going to be better off if you know how to handle that. So
I agree. And Sophia and I wanted to talk a little bit about what it looks like for us. And I think feeding off of that, there is a thing called high functioning anxiety. And what that essentially means is you're able to do your daily tasks. You're able to get through every single day. But you are the only person who really recognizes the anxiety and feels the feelings. But to the outside world, you seem normal. Or at least to most people on the outside world. So I think for me and what I have experienced, I would label myself as high functioning anxiety for the most part. I have had anxiety to the point where it's not high functioning and people are recognizing it, and it's caused major traumatic life events to occur. But I think that's what it looks like and it feels like for me. What does it look like and feel like for you?
So I wasn't totally aware of the term high functioning anxiety, so thanks for bringing that up. I think that definitely applies to me too, because my whole life, after I started going to therapy and we were doing some digging about some of the things that were causing me to be unhappy, it was discovered that I had a ton of anxious thoughts and feelings, and I didn't know that that's what they were. And I was totally able to function in my everyday life with that. Up until that point, I was just unhappy. So, I don't know if anyone in my life would have labeled me as an anxious person. I don't know. I don't really know what people would label me as, but I don't think I had ever heard anyone be like, oh, Sophia, you're a really anxious person. Right. So I guess maybe that applies to me too, the high functioning anxiety deal.
Yeah, I think another important factor to take into consideration with anxiety, and especially high functioning anxiety, is the essence of our podcast. The essence of our podcast is to bring to light items that are normalized on an everyday basis. And high functioning anxiety is one of the top 3 things that I can think of from a mental health standpoint that are not talked about. And you didn't even know what it was until I just, said that that's a thing.
Yeah.
So I think, I really feel like this is such an important episode for that. And I think it just comes full circle in the fact that, this is, what I'm looking for? This is, what we're about. And, yeah, that's really all I have.
And that brings me back to a thought that I had when you were talking about the definition of anxiety, right at the beginning there, was where you said that anxiety disorders are real, serious medical conditions. The fact that has to even be said makes me a little bit sad, because, and like you're saying, with normalizing being uncomfortable in your daily life, having high functioning anxiety, people constantly are dismissing it as, oh, you're fine, just get over it. No, it's a real serious thing that people go through. So
it is. I wanted to touch on really quick what my personal high functioning anxiety may look like for me on a day-to-day basis, just so if you're experiencing this too, know that you're not crazy. And know that, if you're experiencing these things, I'm not a doctor, I cannot medically diagnose you, but you may potentially be suffering from this without even knowing it. So we wrote down some notes, and I'm going to touch on a few of Sophia's points. I suffer from racing thoughts, and I also suffer from irrational thoughts. Those are 2 really big ones. And I think for me, I don't really think I have any others, but I would say those are my 2 really big ones. And in the psychiatric world, they are labeled as ruminating thoughts, if anybody wanted to know that. Whenever I go see my psychiatrist, I say that because that is what the scientific definition of that is. But it feels like racing thoughts, like you can't shut your brain off. If you are somebody who struggles with maybe falling asleep at night, and you're laying there in bed, and you have, I like this analogy, you have all the tabs open on your web browser, and you're going in between them, you probably have racing thoughts or ruminating thoughts. I mean, you may not, but that is one symptom of it.
Yeah, 100%. And so what my anxiety looks like, and sometimes it's not high functioning, the last few years, I'm not exactly sure what changed, if it's a hormonal thing or what, but I've been suffering from panic attacks, which isn't something that I necessarily struggled with my pre-therapy years. I think it's probably a hormonal thing as my body's changing as we're getting older, but anxiety for me definitely looks like racing thoughts, and those racing thoughts for me, we're going to talk a little bit about this more later on, but they're cognitive distortions, which I will explain in a couple of minutes, but there's just a lot of different thinking patterns that are mostly negative, and you go through them. So it's negative thought after negative thought after negative thought after negative thought, and they're just constantly bringing my physical body anyway, because it's what happens to me. It brings my heart rate up. It can make me dizzy. It makes me feel like I'm ready to shut down. I just need to go lay down or something because I feel like I can't function. And so it's a lot of sweatiness in my palms and my armpits is maybe TMI, and then my heart racing a lot. And then the negative thoughts aren't things that I can latch onto. They're just like a stream. It's just a stream of negative thoughts that I am drowning in. And I'm not focused on one in particular. It's just one after the other. And then the irrational thoughts too. A lot of it that I'm thinking doesn't have evidence necessarily that proves it to be true. I'm just kind of making general assumptions from things that don't actually prove that thought, if that makes sense at all.
No,
so yeah, that's what it looks like for me.
It completely does. And I would say I pretty much relate to everything you just said. I did want to hop back on one thing, and I apologize for this, but I think it's also important to notate that the evolution of us as human beings dealing with anxiety or mental health in general in our society is really difficult, because our society, or at least from what I have witnessed as a whole, pushes away mental health. It pushes away, being cognitively aware of these things, and it just wants you to keep pushing forward in your everyday. Mm-hmm. So, with that high functioning anxiety, like I mentioned before, it's almost like a force of habit or a force of nature for us to be able to develop the skill to be able to hide it. Because think about it, as a 3-year-old child, children throw temper tantrums, they cry, they do whatever they need to do to show their emotion, especially if they're anxious or they're scared, etc. But as a grown adult, you can't really do that. You can, but you're going to get some really weird looks. So
but even as a child, you're told to not. You're
exactly.
Told to stop crying, push it down.
We're ingrained from literal children to, not show this, to not act on this, to not do these things, and to just keep moving forward. And eventually we all become adults, and then we realize that we have all these things going on in our brain, and we have to try and figure out how to work with it, because, we can't really, with society, we can't really show it, but then we're working on it behind closed doors. And it's this really messed up thing for me, and that's why I want to create this podcast. I want to create this platform where we talk about, we realize that things are going on behind closed doors. We realize that,
And open those doors.
And, yeah, exactly. And open those doors, because there's no reason for those doors to be closed. These doors should be open. And that is what we want to do. Or at least that's part of my mission here.
Oh, yeah, me too. Absolutely. Open the doors.
Yes. Anxiety is, literally probably number one for me, along with depression, to be able to open that door for.
Yeah, me too. But I mean, there's so many other...
There are. Mental health in general, but anxiety is a big one. So anyways, moving forward.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of wanted...
Do you want to talk on that a
one
little bit
more thing on that.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
With the labeling.
Yes.
So if you're listening to this and you don't know if you have anxiety or not, it's not really that important whether or not you label what you're feeling as anxiety. So I don't know if that's something that I do, is I'm trying to diagnose what I have and to see if that will make me feel better about it or something. I don't know. If it does make you feel better about it, then great. Now you know. But if you don't necessarily want to say, oh, I have anxiety, then don't. That's okay. you may not have anxiety, but even if you don't, everybody experiences anxiety at some point, I think, in their lives.
Yeah, and anxiety is, that fight or flight emotion. It's that I'm in danger, or, something is not right here. And it was stated in a bunch of the medical journals that I read before talking about this podcast. Anxiety is normal. It is a very normal emotion to have, and we are biologically built to have that emotion. It's just when it becomes overabundant or, becomes a constant, etc.
Right. So since we're programmed to have it, we should probably understand how to deal with it when we do have it, no matter how frequently it happens to us.
Yes.
So, I don't know, do you want to move on to that hopeless feeling of anxiety, like why it happens,
yeah.
what our actual thoughts are when that happens?
Let's go for it. I am down for that.
Okay. So, we're going to kind of put ourselves in when we feel hopelessly anxious, like what goes on for us. And I'm going to talk a little bit about before I started working in therapy at all, or right at the beginning of my therapy process, before I had coping mechanisms for my anxiety, what my thought process was like. I actually reached out to my therapist for this episode because it's been 3 years. I've worked on it so much that I honestly couldn't tell you all of the things that I did in that time to get to where I am now. So she has notes. So I contacted her and I was like, hey, what was I thinking 2 years ago? And she reminded me that we did this thing called a thought record. Did you ever do a thought record, Lauren?
I don't think that I did.
Okay, so I'm going to grab out my actual thought record from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, however long it's been now. So a thought record is basically what it sounds like. It's a record of your thoughts. And the important thing about it is it takes all of those racing thoughts where we can't really identify them, and it makes them real, puts them on a piece of paper so that you can actually look at them and challenge them rather than just letting them control you. And so the way that my thought record looked, it was a piece of paper that she handed me, like a little homework assignment, and it said A, B, C, and there's 3 boxes. The first box is something happens. So the event that happens or the thing that you're thinking. And then B is the thing that you tell yourself after that event happens. And then C is how you feel after the thing that you just told yourself. And I just want to read a couple of mine. It's going to get really personal here for a second because these are actually things that I told myself and thought. So one of them was that my roommate told me how much money he was making. And so that's A, that's the thing that happened. My roommate told me how much money he was making. Then B, the thing that I told myself was, you should be making that much money. You suck. What are you doing wrong? Why aren't you good enough? And then C, the thing that I felt after I told myself that was envious, angry, and depressed. I'm going to find another one. Okay, so there was an employer career fair that was right as I was graduating, and I researched the employers at that career fair. That was the event. That was the thing that happened. The thing that I told myself was, I'm not qualified for any of these. No one will hire me, and I'm going to work at this restaurant for the rest of my life. Because I was working at a restaurant at the time. And the things that I felt after that were hopeless and anxious. And then one other one I'll do, because it was another one that created a lot of anxiety. I was babysitting for a 4-year-old at the time, and the woman that I babysit for, she texted me in a different way than she had normally texted me. She usually would use a lot of exclamation points, and she didn't this time. that was a thing that happened. That was A. B, I told myself, she hates me. I must have done something wrong. And then the feeling I got was worried and anxious. And noticing those patterns was really helpful for me. But yeah, so those were my actual thoughts when I'm feeling hopelessly anxious. I would tell myself things like, you suck, or you're not good enough, you're never gonna get a job, and people hate you. So yeah, Lauren, your turn.
I thankfully or unthankfully, thankfully that I have not kind of experienced that myself with the, is that hate talk? Can I say self-hate talk?
Yeah.
Okay, because
hate talk. That was probably hate talk. Yeah.
Okay, I haven't really personally experienced that. So I am somewhat personally grateful for that, but also, I don't know, feel bad because I can't relate back to you at all. But anxiety in and of itself and mental health in and of itself is a journey that everyone travels differently. So I will go into a little bit of mine. I will be fully transparent and honest here with the fact that my anxiety journey, for lack of better terms, is still happening. And I am still on an ongoing journey to figure out how to better help myself, some better coping mechanisms that work a little bit more efficiently and effectively, and in general, just kind of, what's the word for it? Finding my trigger points. Is that good terminology? Figuring out what triggers me so I can try and help it. Because part of the whole thing is pinpointing what is the problem so you can better help solve it. With all that being said, I have definitely over the past, 3 months, 2 months, probably not 3 months, maybe 2 months, have felt hopelessly anxious about a couple of different things. And it has been a really big struggle. I have had a couple of conversations with Sophia about it. I've had a couple of conversations, many conversations with my significant other about it. And at this point, I feel like I'm getting a little bit better after those conversations. And Sophia kind of showed me in a different light what to look out for. Do you want me to kind of go into that a little bit?
Yeah, we can go into that.
Okay, so Sophia and I had a conversation, and I basically told her that I was feeling hopelessly anxious about, money, my relationship, and just not being able to get out of the thought process that I was in and the feelings that I was feeling. They just kept coming back. I couldn't get rid of them. And there's some things that I'm not willing to fully disclose quite yet on here. But I want to see some change in my life. And it's been a struggle. It has not come overnight, and it still hasn't come quite yet. So just constantly living every single day, not seeing any change or results, has left me feeling hopeless that it's never going to change. And then the anxiety kicks in because it's like, oh my gosh, it's never going to change. What am I doing wrong? I'm clearly not, built for this. Maybe, I guess for me, my self-talk is maybes. Maybe, this just isn't for me. Maybe this isn't my path. Maybe this isn't what my life is supposed to hold.
I just want to point out, you said that you don't do the self-hate talk as I was going through.
No.
But that's definitely that's just really negative self-talk. It
is negative self-talk, but I don't ever remember specifically saying you suck.
But you didn't do a thought record. So you don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
No, but seriously, that's like a serious point. That's not just a joke, because I didn't know I was saying those things to myself till I did the thought record. Like, like before I went and looked at the thought record before this episode to like refresh my brain about what the things I was thinking on were, I was like, oh, I never said mean things to myself. And then I went and read it and I was, yep, there's evidence right there, Sophia. You say those things to yourself. So.
Yeah, and that's a valid point. That's a totally valid point. And I do not have proof at this time to say if that is accurate or not. But to me, it's like I just start questioning my reality, and I start questioning what is supposed to be my reality and what is supposed to be my path. Mm-hmm. So I obsessively think about this because it means a lot to me. And my anxieties normally stem out of things that mean a lot to me, such as my relationships, my career, finances, like the big stuff in life that's going to be more of the long term. And I had gotten into this headspace of, it's just not happening. And so Sophia challenged me a little bit on that. And I had been challenged on this in therapy before. I want that to be mentioned. But Sophia approached me with the exact verbiage of what goes through my head because it went through hers.
Yeah.
And then what she did to change that, and it was a game changer for me. Like, it was a complete 180 because I was just like, holy crap. Somebody else has felt this exact same way and they were able to get out of it, so I can too. Sophia, do you want to say what that was?
I think I told you about the, like, if you're gonna feel these things later on, so why are you feeling them now also?
Yes, and the other one too of you gave me the example of your work situation. You had done something for work, or you didn't do something for work, or you did it wrong. I can't quite remember. Yeah. But something was wrong with work, and you were laying in bed that night, and you couldn't fall asleep because your mind was just in, oh my gosh, they're going to hate me. Like, am I going to get fired, etc., etc. And then you had this moment where you stopped yourself and you said, is this doing me anything good right now? Like, can I change anything right now about this situation? No. But do I, like, need sleep? Do I, like, this is where I currently am. Mm-hmm. And then, I don't know, it was just a mind shift for me. And the way that you said all of it and the way that, you felt everything, I feel and have felt things the exact same way.
Yeah, so no, I remember what that conversation that you're talking about with the work thing. Like, I tried to convince you that why feel it twice when you don't even know if it's going to happen the way that you're thinking it's going to happen. Right. So, like, you're making you're predicting the future of what you think may happen, and, like, you think you're going to feel, and that's why I pointed out to you, I'm like, you think you're going to feel dread, or you think you're going to feel upset when this thing happens. But first of all, you don't even know that the thing's going to happen yet. Right. So if you make yourself feel really miserable now, worrying that this thing's going to happen, and it doesn't happen, and then you don't have to feel upset about it, right. Then you've just, like, ruined that moment for yourself, and you didn't need to. And then if it does happen the way you're worrying that it may happen, then you now have two moments where you're feeling terrible and bad, rather than just feeling it when it happens instead of feeling it all of the pre-happening.
Right, exactly. Yep. I feel like throughout this episode you're speaking a lot more clear than me. So, yes, thank you for that.
I don't know about that.
So, yes, and, over the past, we had that conversation 2 weeks ago, I think, and over the past 2 weeks, I have really practiced and said the key points to myself in my head, and it's been a game changer, and I feel kind of silly because this has all been said to me throughout therapy, and it's like, why did it just now click with a conversation I had with a friend for free? But after going to therapy for so many years. But, I reminded myself of something my personal therapist, who I pay to see and help me, sometimes we just need to see things differently. Sometimes we just need to hear things differently. Sometimes we just need to experience things differently. And you never know what's going to help you until it helps you.
And I wouldn't have been able to explain that to you in that way without my therapist. So.
Right. So it's just like it's trial totally and error. And, So to wrap that up, I'm still in the process of it. I'm still on my anxiety journey, as we can call it. But I'm getting better, and I'm getting help, and I'm feeling a little bit better.
Yeah. So my journey looks slightly different. I didn't know I had anxiety. Then I knew I had anxiety. Now I'm working on the anxiety, and it's like plummeted. It's still there, but it's really like the work that I have been doing every single day has been working, and I don't feel as I mean, like, if I was at 100% anxiety before, I'm probably at like 30 now, if that paints a picture in your head of where I'm really at good with my journey. Yeah. So it's not gone. I don't think it ever will be gone, but the things that I'm doing and working on are working for me, and we want to give you those tools, so hopefully they can work for you also.
Right. And I hope I touched on some key points too. Money is a really big stress for a lot of people. Knowing where you're going to live in a year could be a stress for you. Knowing your career could be a really big stress for you. Relationships can be a big stress, especially if if you're not seeing somebody, or have a friendship that's going toxic, or you want something and it's not happening, whatever capacity that could be, and you start to feel hopeless over time because it's not happening. Like, it can happen with anything and to anyone. So I hope that we touched on some of the bigger topics that people struggle with. And there's more, I don't know how to say this, but there are so many different things that people can struggle with, but I know that those are a lot of the big topics.
Yeah. I don't even, like one of the things you were talking about is identifying your triggers, and we talked about that in a previous episode where I don't really do that. Yeah. I still haven't really done that, but...
And that's totally fine.
I think that's what, like, labeling some of these things that could be triggers are really important.
Right. And, I actually am glad you touched back on that, because I had something I wanted to say. Labeling is totally up to you. Mm-hmm. And even between Sophia and I, who have done copious amounts of work, approach it differently. For me personally, labeling to an extent helps me. Labeling helps in the essence of other people understanding what I'm dealing with, and it helps me to be able to seek the proper health. For example, if I didn't label that I was struggling with anxiety, how could I walk in to see a therapist without being able to tell them, I mean, if they're experienced enough, they should know and be able to recognize symptoms. But I'm a little bit more advanced in the process now, so I can say, hey, this is what I struggle with, and, they can help me, and I can find specific specialized help for whatever I deal with. As many of you know, I have ADHD. I can seek out therapists and psychiatrists who deal with ADHD. So being able to identify and put labels on certain things have helped me a lot because I'm able to find more specialists and more care in the way that I need it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's really, like, labels are a really tough one because for some people they're super triggering, actually. Right. And for some people they're not. For me and Lauren, it's not triggering. Right. It's helpful for us. Like, knowing what I go through, knowing that there's a word that applies to what I'm feeling is super helpful for me for the same reasons. Like, other people also can experience this because there's a word for it, you know?
Yeah, like, I like doing research on my own of, you know, different support groups or different just resources or different techniques for helping with what I'm currently dealing with. And having a label for that helps me. But if I label too much, then I just feel like a label. I don't feel like Lauren. I don't feel like me. And every single person on this planet is unique to them. So I think that being able to keep that in some capacity is really healthy and needed because you need to be happy and healthy in your own uniqueness.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to kind of talk about some of those coping mechanisms that we've been hinting at?
We'll talk about coping mechanisms. Sorry, we definitely went off on a little bit of a tangent, or I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but back on track now. So coping mechanisms. These are back to the basics. These are some of the first coping mechanisms we learned and found useful and still find useful today. Like, I mean, these are things that we still practice, even though we may have added in some more coping mechanisms. So, for me, I think going to therapy is a huge one. And I have done a couple of different things within therapy, which Sophia has actually labeled out here, so I'm going to go over them a little bit. I have done CBT.
Are those ones that you've done too?
Yeah, I have. Okay. I have done, noticing thought patterns and behavior. I have done guided meditation. I've done yoga. Yoga is a huge one I have found to help, calm my brain a little bit. And I've also done, what is it? I want to call it EBT, but I don't think it is. It's EFT, not EBT. It's EFT, and it's essentially a tapping treatment, and it can help a lot with anxiety, and that has helped me. What else has helped me? I don't know. I that's like all I can think of.
Okay, I can talk about mine.
Just a lot of talk therapy. So
yeah, like where you're just talking to a therapist, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So mine has really been a process. I've been doing cognitive behavioral therapy for the whole time I've been in therapy, which is an approach to rewiring your brain, basically. It really digs down and gets to the root of things and challenges those things and then gets you to think about them in a different way. So earlier I was talking about that cognitive distortions sheet. So one of the first things that my therapist had me do was she printed out this piece of paper that was called Cognitive Distortions. It had all of these different thinking patterns on it, and she asked me to check the boxes. Well, not boxes, but it was like labeled 1 through 10, and she asked me to read all of them and put a check mark next to the ones that I think that I do. And I kind of want to go through what those 10 are because I think it will be super helpful for anyone listening to try and think, okay, do I do that? And because a big thing with cognitive behavioral therapy is recognizing patterns of behavior, recognizing patterns of thinking in order to shift those patterns of thinking into a more positive way. So I actually did all 10 of them. I put a check mark next to all of them when she gave me this piece of paper. All or nothing or black and white thinking is number 1 on the list here. So what that means kind of is if you're not perfect, then you feel like you're a total loser. If you don't get everything that you want, it feels like you got nothing at all. If you're having a good day, then the whole rest of your life is perfect and you don't need to go to therapy anymore. It's a really dangerous way to be thinking. It causes a lot of negativity. Some of the things on my thought record as I was going through and looking at these thoughts that I wrote down 3 years ago, a lot of them were all or nothing thinking. And as I go through some of these, I might actually refer back to like one of the thoughts that I had that was all or nothing, or one of these other ones too. So catastrophizing or fortune telling is when you predict the future negatively without considering other more likely outcomes. So an example of that is, I'm definitely going to fail my test. If I tell her that, then she's going to hate me forever. So you're thinking in the future of what's going to happen, even though it may not actually happen that way, and you're not considering other outcomes that could happen if you do something like that. Number 3 is mind reading, which means you believe you know what other people are thinking without asking. So you think that by reading someone's body language, then you know what they're thinking. For example, one of the things that I have on here about me is that, so with the babysitting one that she texted, she just didn't put an exclamation point. Like, there wasn't really a whole lot there, but I decided she hates me. Like, I know that she hates me. I'm reading her mind. She hates me. I know what she's thinking. And then overgeneralization. I do this one all the time. I also do mind reading all the time, where you make a sweeping negative conclusion that goes far beyond the current situation. So if I felt uncomfortable in my first day of class, that means I won't be able to enjoy the whole rest of the year. So you're overgeneralizing one instance that happens and applying it to everything. Mental filter or disqualifying the positive. There's 2 different ways to go about that. You develop selective hearing, and you only hear and see negative evidence, and you ignore all of the positive evidence. So that's kind of where we were talking about in the last in Ebbs and Flow, or I don't remember which episode it was, but the rose-colored glasses. So, for example, one of the things that I used to do is if I got this was with grades. I was super anal about my grades in college and in high school. If I got one bad grade or one wrong answer on a test, that disqualified everything else that I did right. I still got an A. I got everything else right, but if I just got that one question wrong, then I would beat myself up about it. I focused hyper on that negative thing and ignored all of the rest of the positive things. And then disqualifying the positive is slightly different, where you tell yourself that positive experiences don't matter. So the example that's on the paper applies to me 100% is I did well in that one basketball game because I got lucky. Since I'm a basketball player, I used to think that way all the time. I did okay that one time and it was a fluke. Like, I'm not actually good. So you make excuses for why the positive isn't real or doesn't exist. Emotional reasoning is something that I do absolutely all the time, where you start believing that your emotions are fact. I feel something, therefore it is. I feel like
couldn't relate at all. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I feel, therefore it is.
That was sarcasm, feel stupid, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
Was wondering.
Therefore I am stupid. So the one that I had on my thought record that relates to this one is I used to be a math tutor. And so if I couldn't help a student with a certain problem because it wasn't a class that I took, or I had taken the class a long time ago and I didn't remember. My thought was, you're confusing them, you're stupid, you aren't good enough to be a teacher. And then the thing I felt was, I'm stupid. And then I believed I was stupid. And another huge one, which I still struggle with, but I can notice a lot now, is should statements. So where you're telling yourself or other people that they should be doing something, or mostly yourself that you should be doing something. And if you're not, then it's gonna be the end of the world. So for example, it's terrible that I made a mistake. I should always do my best. That's one thing for me that was huge. I really hate making mistakes. I should be perfect. I should never mess up. Those were things that I would tell myself. Labeling yourself, which is taking overgeneralization to a little bit of a higher extreme, where something happens and then you label yourself with a very negative name. So one of the things I had on my thought record for that was, I like sex. Then I labeled myself as a slut. I felt like I enjoy sex, so I'm a slut. And those are things I would tell myself. And then the last one on here is personalization. You see yourself as the cause for things that you have absolutely no control over. Or you're the target of things that have nothing to do with you. So samples of that, and this one isn't actually mine, this is on the sheet. My parents are divorced because of me. Or the person I work with was short with me because I did something wrong. And I mean, do you do that one, Lauren?
Yeah, a little bit.
I know you do that one.
Yeah.
I know you've looked at me before and you've been like, are you mad at me? Did I do something wrong? Just because I made a facial expression a different way than I usually do.
I think this plays out a decent amount in my social interactions, for sure.
Yeah, are you looking at them and noticing things that you do in your own head at all, or no?
Yeah, and how do I say this? I had somebody, I don't know who it was, basically tell me that a lot of the things I assume of others is because I would do it. Mm-hmm. Or, I would think that way, or I'd feel that way. So if somebody is doing something that, I would think or feel, I automatically assume they're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's when I was going through my book, I had that exact same mindset where I was and that's why I felt a lot of these things, is because I'm like, well, if they did that, then I would feel that, so that means they're feeling that.
Right. Or if I would, which is also equally negatively unhealthy, I would pin past experiences on somebody new in my life. So mm-hmm. if this instant occurred and then this reaction occurred, I would or will take that and automatically think that this new person in my life is going to do the same thing to me that the past person did.
Right, and those are cognitive distortions. Those are not true. That's not true. That everyone is different. Everyone has different personalities. Everyone acts and perceives and reacts in a different way than you do. You can't assume that somebody else is going to think and feel the same way as you, because they don't. That's not true.
Right. And I think too, just to state, a lot of the stuff that you, Sophia, are talking about, I have experienced, but for me, in dealing with my anxiety, it has been a journey of dealing with irrational fears outside of relationships a bit more, and I haven't necessarily touched on the things that you are touching on right now until recently. So even though I'm cognitively aware of them and the fact that I do them, I just don't really have answers for this episode because I have recently come out of and still working on coming out of that hopelessly anxious feeling.
Yeah. I mean, same. This is all stuff I've done recently too.
Right.
But, I'm really, I take things very seriously, like to an extreme where I find out something and then I just go home and study it and do it and do it and do it. And that's kind of what I did with this. Yeah. Like, obviously I still have these from 3 years ago. Like,
right. Which, no, is great that you're working on yourself. But yeah, I'm aware of them. I just don't have as much to talk about on them because of the fact that I'm still working on, coping with them and figuring out mechanisms to be able to help myself. But I do relate to a lot of what you said.
Well, that's why I'm bringing them up, because part of cognitive behavioral therapy, it's not, like, I'm not saying that these are all things that you shouldn't do, because there's that shouldn't, which is a cognitive distortion. It's here are things that are cognitive distortions, and this was the first step for me to get past my, or not get past, but, get to 30% of my anxiety, was realizing that those are cognitive distortions. That those are not that healthy way to be thinking at all. So noticing not only that it's a cognitive distortion, but also that I was doing it. And so once I noticed those, then I could see when I was doing it, and I could challenge it. Which brings it to the next thing on here is challenging thoughts and looking for evidence. So the first thing that I would suggest for anyone that's going through a hopelessly anxious feeling is to try doing a thought record, which I kind of explained earlier how to do it, but I'll go through it really quickly again, is when you notice yourself feeling crappy or anxious, then do a little bit of back up and figure out how you got there. And so use that 3 steps where something happens, write down the thing that happened, write down the thing that you told yourself, and then write down the thing that you felt. For me, I started by like, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now. I'm thinking these things. So I was like, all right, I'll write it down. And then it would kind of lead me back to that part A where the thing that happened. But later on, after doing it for a little while, it was easier to write down the thing that happened first, then write down the thing that I started telling myself, and then write down the thing that I felt. By the end of it, I actually started writing down positive things. I went to career fair. I had a really good conversation with someone at the career fair. I told myself I could see myself working there, and then I felt really good and positive about myself. So eventually it kind of got to be where positive things started happening, but I don't know what it's going to look like for you guys. And then identifying negative core beliefs was a huge one. Did you do identifying negative core beliefs?
Yeah, I did. And I think I also want to say on this whole thing, I was able to identify a lot of these things earlier on in my anxiety journey. But I just don't think I necessarily put the work in until now. So yes, to answer your question, I definitely have done that.
Yeah. So I didn't even know what negative core beliefs were. My therapist gave me that term. And some of them for me was, I'm not good enough. I needed to be great. And the definition of greatness was so high, like, and unachievable that I constantly was feeling not good enough, which, again, is a negative core belief. You're not good enough. I believed that I was unlovable and that I was ugly and a couple of other things. And so once you do this thought record, pull from that some of the things that you are telling yourself, because once you become conscious of the things you're telling yourself, you can look through those things and you can say, oh, wow, I tell myself a lot that I am lazy. That was another thing. I told myself a lot that I was lazy. Or, oh, wow, I tell myself a lot that I'm not good enough. Or I tell myself a lot that I'm fat. And really identify what those negative core beliefs are. And then the next coping mechanism for me to challenge those negative core beliefs would be positive affirmations. There's so much more that I want to talk about, but we're really getting to the end of the episode here. Yeah. So, like, I have so many other coping mechanisms that I want to get into with the things that I've done and worked for me, but I think we're going to have to do them in a different episode, because maybe we'll just do, like, a whole coping mechanisms episode or something.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. And maybe I'll be a little bit further on my journey and can provide some more content on my end. I think that we should conclude out this episode by touching on some key points of what tends to produce anxiety for people, and maybe through that, our listeners would be able to potentially identify some key points within their life that may be causing them anxiety if they're feeling it but they're not really sure of the source. Mm-hmm. And we can touch on that real quick and then let you guys think on it. Mm-hmm. So I can go ahead and start that off. Yeah. One of the big ones that I mentioned earlier on in this episode is money. Money is a huge touch point. I mean, even Sophia said it as well. You know, her roommate touched on how much they were making, and it was a trigger for Sophia that, you know, she started feeling anxious about. Another one is love or lack thereof, and I know this is another one that you, Sophia, have felt anxious mm-hmm. about. I feel like I have felt it in my own way, just more so worried that people will either stop loving me or they don't really love me. They just think that they do. So that can be
that's mind reading.
It totally is. But that can be a source of anxiety for people. Career/work. This one is a really big one for me. I don't think this one is as big for Sophia, if I'm correct.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, except for when I mess up, but that's not necessarily because of work. It's because of the messing up.
That one for me is pretty big. So and I know that can be big for a lot of other people. Health, for me, for example, is my endometriosis. I have anxiety around that, and I also have anxiety around, which I don't think I've actually talked on the podcast at all. I have really bad migraines, and I have a lot of food sensitivities which cause those migraines, so I get anxiety like when going out to eat sometimes that I'm going to be exposed to foods that may get me sick. And
health is actually one for me too. Because I've been having this weird thing going on where I'm smelling things that don't exist, and also I have constant ringing in my ears, and those are like neurological things, which is super scary. I don't actually know or think that anything is wrong with me, but the fact that those are weird symptoms that have to do with my brain is really it creates anxiety, because I'm like,
and if you live in the US too, I'll put out this one. Health and money can be equally tied with one another. Our healthcare system, it can be very expensive, and you know, it can be fearful for some people even getting sick because of the money aspect of it. The next one, and then I'll let you take over, Sophia, is anxiety producing more anxiety. Mm-hmm. If you are somebody like me who tends to have anxious moments, then the fear of having anxious moments can eventually happen, and I have definitely experienced that. So if you want to talk more on that, I am more than open to talking about my journey with that. But that can be really big, and I don't really feel like it's talked about. So I wanted to touch on that.
For me, it's like I'm anxious, and then I'm anxious about being anxious because I can't be anxious right now because I have to do this project, or I have to sleep, or I have to work. And, like, I'm anxious that I'm anxious that I'm anxious, and it's just a cycle of anxious. It's not good.
I get anxious about being anxious about sleeping.
Yeah. Yeah, it's our cycle.
With my insomnia,
and then some other just general ones that, I mean, not general as in that they don't matter. They matter. But we're getting high on the time here. So just like death, that creates a lot of anxiety. It creates a lot of sadness. Family, issues with family, wanting to have a family, so many things that can create anxiety around family. And then social situations, people who have social anxiety, self-confidence in those social situations are definitely big triggers. So if any of those things trigger you, take note of that, identify that, maybe write down what you're telling yourself about those things, and then try and reframe them.
Well, I hope you got something out of this. I hope that it was able to help you. So thank you, Sophia, for sharing all of your tips and tricks and what you have gone through and experienced yourself.
Yeah, I hope you guys got some use out of that too. And next time we talk about it, I'll tell you the rest of the stuff in my notebook here. So have a good rest of your week.
Yeah, have a great rest of your week. Bye.